They say there was a secret chord that David played and it pleased the Lord. But you don't care about the music, do you? It goes like this: the fourth, the fifth. Hey there friends, welcome back to the channel. My name's Alex Laux and I have another camera review for you today. The Nikon F5, the last 35mm SLR that Nikon marketed towards the professional market, and a personal grail camera of mine. In fact, when I got the Nikon F80, I bought a battery grip just to make it look like an F5, which was out of my price range. So I'm here in Oakville, Ontario, back in McCraney Valley in the Sheridan College campus, to shoot this for you. But as always, let's head back to the studio. I'll give you a history of the camera and show you around the bits and pieces. All right, see you in a bit. The Nikon F5 is the penultimate result of a long line of professional 35mm SLRs. And it was the final professional 35mm SLRs marketed towards professional photographers before the serious rise of digital within that realm. It all started in 1959. With the release of the Nikon F, and introduced the idea of a system SLR, that is a camera that could be customizable in multiple different ways to suit the need of the photographer. Nikon produced batteries, battery packs, motor drives, even a 250 shot magazine for the Nikon F. But the real power was the fact that it was released instantly with a catalog of high quality optics in the bayonet Nikon F mount. It was far from perfect, so in 1971, Nikon listened to the concerns of the professional photography world and released the Nikon F2. The F2 fixed most of these issues, notably having a battery in the camera body itself and removing the need to take off the entire back of the camera to load and unload film, installing instead a more traditional hinged back. But most importantly is that they kept the compatibility with the existing set of lenses and introduced new and updated lenses, eventually going with ones that allowed for some form of semi-automatic metering in the form of the late Nikon F2AS. The mid-1970s brought a great deal of electronic automation to the camera industry, notably through the release of the Canon A1 in 1975. Nikon had been experimenting with some form of semi-automatic metering in the form of the Nikkormat EL, EL2, and the recently released Nikon FE. But as they were working towards their next release, they noticed that the designs they had for the new Nikon F3 looked a lot like the Nikon F2. They needed something to give that camera a bit more of a push, make it stand out in the field. For that, they turned to noted Italian design firm Ital Design Gagaro. Gagaro turned out a sleek, all-black design with a high prism finder and even a red racing stripe on the hand grip. The Nikon F3 hit the shelf in 1980 and certainly turned heads. While many took to the F3, others panned the camera because of its reliance on batteries to drive the shutter and the meter. Either way, the Nikon F3 became a popular and long-lasting camera, with production only ending in the year 2000. Like the previous two models, the F3 came with all the accessories, including the new MD4 motor drive, new flashes, a fast shutter, and that 250 shot magazine. The F3 also became the testbed for Nikon's early experiments with autofocus, producing the Nikon F3 AF, which went nowhere. Even Kodak took the F3 and turned it into their first digital SLR, the DCS 100. But as we all know, in 1985, the Minolta Maxxum 7000 came out and changed the game, but Nikon was already on it. Nikon, after taking lessons from their first successful autofocus SLR, the F501, and their experimentation with matrix metering from the FA, combined everything into 1988's Nikon F4. If the F3 had turned heads, the F4's space-age design quickly became known as one of Nikon's best-looking cameras. Ergonomic, easy to use, the F4 was the best of both worlds, accepting every Nikon lens to that point, and some even beyond. The Nikon was at home with both autofocus and manual focus lenses, plus all the knobs and dials controlling the camera's function made the camera really Nikon's last manual camera. While you could still customize the F4, the integrated motor drive was dependent on the battery grip you had installed, and everything was swappable. Nikon also finally installed a standard hot shoe for flash and all the usual accessories, including, yes, that 250-shot magazine, plus a new array of data backs that allowed for a wide expansion of capabilities of the F4. While I'm unclear on when the development of the F5 started, there's a chance it started in the early to middle 1990s. It continued certain design elements from the F4, but turned everything upside down. The Canon EOS and Maxim systems had already done away with most traditional knobs and dials. So when the Nikon F5 hit shelves in 1998, they followed that trend. Everything on the F5 was controlled through buttons and a pair of command dials. But Nikon also introduced some fantastic new technologies. A self-adjusting curtain, new 3D color matrix metering, fast autofocus with a 5-point auto detection system, and the ability to use the new Type G lenses that did away with the traditional aperture ring. Despite this, Nikon did away with the ability to remove a battery grip, and it didn't include a 250-shot magazine option. The 3D color matrix metering could only be used using the DP30 and DA30 finders. The two other finders, both waist level, were again limited to center weighted and spot metering only. The F5 could accept two new data backs, the MF27 that allowed imprinting of exposure details into the frame spaces, or the more advanced MF28 that allowed for a 9-frame bracketing, interval shooting, and up to 1,000-hour exposure time. The foundations of the F5 would go on to inspire and build the first professional digital SLR from Nikon, the D1. And that same style roughly continues with the D5 today. And while Nikon would replace the F5 with the F6 in 2006, the F6 was aimed more at professional, like semi-professional amateur photographers who just love film but wanted the same feel as their digital camera. But that's enough about the history. Let's take a closer look at the beast that is the Nikon F5. And here it is, the Nikon F5. As you can see, this is a heavy beast of a camera, and you can clearly see the influences that this had on cameras like the D1, D2. They really started to change after the D3. But let's take a closer look around the camera itself. The front section is fairly plain. You have a mirror lockup control here, and this button here will stop down your lens for depth of field preview. And you have your lens release button here. On the side, this little switch allows you to control your autofocus function from continuous, single, and manual focus. However, on this camera, I do recommend going with either single or continuous for the best results. You also have your standard PC socket up here and your front command dial. Up on the front top of the camera, you have your LCD screen. This is nice, big, and bright and displays tons of information. You have your bracketing control. You have your mode set. This allows you to use, you press this and then turn it, and that sets it from program, aperture, shutter, and manual mode. You have your EB compensation, and you have your on-off switch by your shutter. And there's a little release lock here to allow you to turn it on and off. Up on the side of your finder, this is the DP30. I have my center weight, matrix, and spot metering, plus the built-in diopter. Great for people who have glasses like me. On the camera back, you have your typical round viewfinder frame. It has a mirror shutter, a shutter on here that allows you to block off stray lights if doing long exposures at night. And then you have your release lock here. You also have right over here, this is the number 2 for the automatic film rewind. You have the control knob here that allows you to do single, continuous low, continuous high, and a manual rewind knob. This is the film back. I just have the plain one on mine. I haven't been able to find an MF27 or 28, although I am looking for a 28, but you do have a 4-way D-pad. You have a second LCD down here, plus you have your bracketing, lock, custom, flash mode, and ISO set. There's normally a little hinged door that goes back here to hide these. Mine unfortunately have broken. And you have your release trigger here, autofocus button, and then the first rewind release. Now if you wanted to rewind manually, you simply release number 1 and then you can use this, or you'd flip up number 2 to do it automatically. You also have your autofocus, auto exposure lock, and an AF start button and your second command dial. The one thing that it does have is a vertical release, but it does not have the command dials on the grip itself. Yeah, for a camera this advanced, it is fairly simple thanks mainly to the buttons and dials to control everything rather than knobs. So let's head back to the field and I'll talk a little bit about my experience with the F5. Okay, so what am I shooting today? Well, I am shooting it with the 28-70 f2.8D lens, a beautiful masterclass set of optics, and Ilford Delta 100. It's bright, it's sunny, and I'm going to be developing it in Ilford Perceptol. All right, let's hit the trails.
If the F4 is your classic muscle car, then the F5 is a modern supercar. The camera is big, heavy, and can take anything you throw at it. From hard winters to humid summers, rain, snow, and black powder, my F5 has seen it all and taken it all in stride, and even has a few battle scars to prove it. If you're going to be using the camera for any length of time, you're going to want a nice big strap, and possibly hang the camera carbine style to take the weight off the back of your neck. Despite the size of the camera having 2 complete sets of control for horizontal and vertical shooting, it can still feel a little clunky. The shutter releases are at least smooth and soft to the touch without being on a hair trigger. Loading film is fast, but not automatic. Once you have the leader pulled across, you need to press the shutter button to advance to the first frame once you close the film back. All the controls are found in buttons and accessed through a pair of command dials. The viewfinder is big, bright, and displays all the information you could ask for that you don't need to move your eyes away from the finder at any time. The 3D color matrix metering is bulletproof and nails the exposure for both black and white and color films. The autofocus is equally fast and accurate, and although the 5 focus points are a little hard to see on my copy, but that's probably due to age than design. The F5 does retain the ability to manually rewind the film, which is a nice touch, although a speedy rewind automatic mode is nice and fast. It certainly isn't the perfect camera, but the Nikon F5 does come close.
But you know, the one thing that really makes Nikon special is the plethora of lenses available for it. Because the Nikon F5 has the F mount, you can use almost every lens in Nikon's arsenal, at least modern arsenal. But let's get into a little bit more shooting, and I'll talk to you a little bit more about some great lenses and some things to look for when choosing a lens kit for your F5. All right?
Despite being an F mount, the F5 is far more comfortable working with autofocus lenses than manual focus ones. But on the plus side, it will work with almost all autofocus lenses from Nikon, including the original AF, the Type D, and Type G. The one type it won't work with is the newest Type E, with the electromagnetic aperture controls. It will also support the silent wave motor lenses, or AFS, along with VR and VR2 optics, With these things combined, you have access to a massive catalog of amazing optics. The one thing to note with the early AF and Type D lenses is you have to set the aperture to the maximum, and then lock it down or you'll get the FEE error on your camera. If you're looking for period appropriate lenses, look no further than Type D, which won't drain your bank too much. Some good prime lenses can include the 24 or 28mm f2.8D, my personal favorite, the 35mm f2D, and the 50mm f1.4D. For street work, I enjoy working with the DC Nikon 105mm f2D, which has a unique defocus control allowing you to control where your out of focus elements fall. If you want those fast zooms, the 28 to 70mm f2.8D and 80 to 200mm f2.D are early versions of what would become the Nikon Trinity. A good knockabout lens is the 28 to 105mm f3.5 to 4.5D, and because the f5 has everything controlled from the camera, the Type G lenses work perfectly. Personally, I love working with my 14 to 24mm f2.8G and 70 to 200mm f2.8G, both of which work flawlessly. While you can mount those manual focus lenses, you are limited to spot and center weighted metering, along with aperture priority and manual modes.
And there we go. That is the Nikon F5. It is hands down my favorite autofocus 35mm SLR from Nikon. And I don't think I'll ever let this camera go. And even if it dies, I will get it replaced hands down. And the best part is that unlike when I first started shooting Nikon autofocus, when these things were still going for $1,000 plus on the used market, and when I first got it, they were still costing $700. These days, you can get a body for between $350 and $450. And yeah, it might be a bit beat up. They were professional cameras, but you can find good working examples from trusted shops in that price range, which is fantastic. Or I might just update and go with an F6 if they've started coming down in price. Who knows? I hope this thing has several more shutter actuations left in it. So let me know in the comments below, what is your favorite professional Nikon body? Are you an old school F2 user? Or do you prefer the 1980s F3, the space age F4? Or do you just go full modern and say, screw it, F6 all the way? If you're new to the channel, please consider subscribing, hitting that bell notification icon, and giving me a thumbs up. Until next time, my name's Alex Lowe. Get out there, stay safe, let the hallelujahs ring.